I think my fiancé is sneaking someone into our home and the Ring camera proves he is hiding it. He tilted his phone away from her. That was the moment she knew. Not the perfume. Not the missed appearances on the Ring camera. Not even the rejected intimacy. It was that one tiny, almost invisible movement, the way someone physically shields a screen when they have something to hide, and in that single second, everything she had been trying to talk herself out of feeling became impossible to ignore. And the worst part is, she has been living with this feeling for weeks. Carrying it to work, carrying it home, carrying it into a bed that has felt increasingly empty even when he is right there beside her. She carries it through her morning routine, through her commute, through conversations with coworkers who have no idea that behind her composed expression is a woman quietly dismantling and reassembling every memory of the last several months, searching for the moment things changed, searching for the explanation that makes all of this make sense. So let me tell you everything, because this story is messier and sadder than it first appears, and by the end of it you are going to feel exactly what she is feeling right now. Our storyteller is engaged. She works opposite shifts from her fiancé, meaning they are constantly ships passing in the night, which under normal circumstances can be tough but manageable for couples who trust each other completely. But trust, as she has been slowly and painfully discovering, requires a foundation. And lately that foundation has been developing some very serious cracks. It started small, the way these things always do. He became distant. Not in a dramatic, explosive way, but in that quiet creeping way where you start wondering if you are imagining things. You reach for his hand and it feels different, not cold exactly, but unfamiliar, like shaking hands with someone you used to know well. You try to start a conversation and it goes nowhere, deflected with one-word answers and distracted eyes pointed at a screen. You suggest intimacy and he pulls back, gently enough that you cannot quite call it a rejection, but firmly enough that the message lands all the same. And so you tell yourself he is tired, he is stressed, he is going through something, because the alternative explanation is one you are not ready to look at directly yet. You love this person. You have built plans around this person. You have told your family and your friends and yourself that this is the one. And so you extend grace, over and over, even as the grace starts to cost you pieces of yourself. She started paying closer attention, because when your gut is screaming at you, your brain eventually has to listen. She noticed he had not been showing up on their Ring camera when he came home. Now, he is the primary user on that account, which means he has administrative control over it. Which means he could theoretically disable it or adjust its settings without her knowing. And she sat with that realization, feeling the specific kind of dread that comes not from what you have found but from understanding what finding it means about the person who arranged it that way. She noticed the perfume. In their home. A scent that did not belong to her, something warm and floral and entirely foreign, clinging to the air in a way that stopped her mid-step the first time she caught it. She stood very still in that hallway, her brain doing that desperate scrambling thing where it reaches for every possible benign explanation before allowing the obvious one to surface. A coworker who visited, a friend who stopped by, something harmless and forgettable. But the explanations felt thin even as she was building them, like tissue paper held up against a window, letting all the light through. Then there are the shifts. He has been picking up work at times that feel strategically inconvenient, almost artfully so. A trip to meet family came up and suddenly he found a shift to cover, apologetic but unavailable. Her birthday weekend arrived and he chose to work, and she told herself that was fine, that adults sometimes work on birthdays, that it did not mean anything. But the disappointment settled somewhere low in her chest and stayed there. Now look, people do work on birthdays. People do pick up extra shifts for genuinely ordinary reasons. But when you stack that on top of everything else, the distance, the camera, the perfume, the phone tilting, the rejected intimacy, you stop seeing individual events and you start seeing a pattern. And patterns, unlike single incidents, are very hard to explain away. Patterns do not happen by accident. Patterns are built, one small decision at a time, by someone who knows exactly what they are doing. She is not accusing him outright. She does not have proof. And that is exactly the position that makes this so agonizing, because without proof you cannot confront, you cannot resolve, you cannot move. You just exist in this suspended, nauseating uncertainty where you keep second-guessing your own instincts. The cruelty of that position is almost architectural. She has to keep functioning inside a relationship that may already be a lie, has to keep being present and kind and patient with someone who may be actively deceiving her, because the moment she says something she cannot unsay, the moment she accuses without evidence, she risks being told she is paranoid, she is insecure, she is the problem. And so she stays quiet. And she watches. And she carries it alone. She asked a simple question. Would she be wrong to place a hidden camera aimed at the back door of their home, just to see what is actually happening when she is not there? And I want to sit with that question for a second before I tell you what I think, because it is not as simple as it sounds. On the surface, a hidden camera feels like a violation of privacy. It feels sneaky. It feels like something you do in a spy movie, not in a relationship that is supposed to be built on love and honesty. And I understand why people recoil from that instinct, because ideally you should be able to just ask your partner directly and receive an honest answer. But we are not living in the ideal version of this situation. We are living in the version where she has already been picking up signals for weeks, where the Ring camera is being manipulated by the one person who has the access to do so, where there is unfamiliar perfume in their shared home, and where her fiancé is physically shielding his phone from her while texting someone. That is not a healthy relationship dynamic that just needs a good honest conversation. That is a situation where one person already knows something and is actively working to keep the other person from finding out. The honesty ship sailed quietly, without her even being told it was leaving. There is also something deeply important to understand about her specific circumstances that I do not think should be glossed over. They work opposite shifts. This means there are long stretches of time, hours every single day, when she has absolutely no visibility into what is happening in her own home. She leaves for work in one direction while he is present, and she returns to a space that could have held anything in her absence. She is not surveilling a stranger. She is not installing cameras in someone else's space out of paranoia or jealousy or insecurity. She is trying to understand what is happening in the place where she lives, the place she presumably contributes to financially and emotionally, the place that is supposed to be safe and hers, the place she is supposed to be building a future inside of. A camera at the back door is not an invasion of his privacy in the way that, say, going through his private messages would be. It is documentation of who enters and exits a shared space. That is a meaningful distinction, and anyone who tells her otherwise is holding her to a standard of fairness that her fiancé stopped meeting a long time ago. I also want to talk about what she is not doing, because I think it matters. She is not going through his phone. She is not hiring a private investigator. She is not calling his friends or his family or his coworkers to fish for information. She is not making accusations she cannot back up. She is not blowing up the relationship on the basis of a feeling, even though that feeling has been growing louder and more insistent with every passing week. She is trying to find out the truth in the quietest, least confrontational, most contained way she possibly can. And honestly, that tells you a lot about the kind of person she is. Someone who is still trying to be fair even while they are hurting. Someone who is giving this relationship every possible chance before she does something irreversible. That is not the behavior of someone who is paranoid. That is the behavior of someone who is heartbroken and still trying to be careful with a love they are not yet ready to let go of. Now here is where my gut really speaks up. The Ring camera situation bothers me more than almost anything else in this story, and I want to explain why. Because that is not passive behavior. Forgetting to text back is passive. Being emotionally distant is passive, even if it is hurtful. But going into the settings of a home security system and making adjustments so that your comings and goings are not recorded, that is an active, deliberate choice. That requires intention. It requires someone to think to themselves, I do not want this documented, and then open the app, navigate the settings, and take steps to ensure it is not. That requires a moment of conscious decision-making that is very hard to walk back with an innocent explanation. You do not accidentally turn off your Ring camera. You do not stumble into the administrative settings and unknowingly alter the recording behavior. That is a behavior that only makes sense in the context of someone who has something specific they do not want their partner to see, something that walks through a door and does not belong in this relationship. And look, I am a fair person. I will acknowledge that there could be explanations I am not thinking of. Maybe he turned off the camera for a reason that has nothing to do with cheating. Maybe there is something else entirely going on, a surprise, a personal struggle, something he is ashamed of that is not infidelity. Maybe he is dealing with something privately and has made a series of poor choices about how to handle it. All of that is possible. But here is the thing about explanations: they should come from him, voluntarily and honestly, offered with the kind of openness that a real partner owes you. Not from her having to construct them in his defense while he says nothing and tilts his phone away from her face and lets her carry the weight of a suspicion he could dissolve with a single honest conversation. She deserves to know what is happening in her own life. Full stop. There is one more angle here that I think is worth examining carefully, which is the question of what happens after she gets the footage, whatever it shows. If she puts up that camera and it shows nothing unusual, quiet evenings and an empty doorway and nothing more, she will need to have a serious and honest conversation with him about why she felt the need to do it in the first place. Because the underlying issues do not disappear just because the camera shows an empty doorway. The distance is still real. The rejected intimacy is still real. The perfume and the camera tampering and the phone tilting are still real, and they still point to something being broken between them, even if that something is not what she fears. A relationship cannot survive on surveillance and suspicion alone. At some point, either the trust gets rebuilt through honesty and vulnerability and the kind of hard conversations that neither person wants to have, or it dissolves entirely into something neither of them wanted. But if she puts up that camera and it shows exactly what she is afraid it will show, then she will have the concrete answer she needs to stop second-guessing herself and start making decisions about her own future. And that information, painful and shattering as it would be, is information she absolutely has the right to have. She has a right to walk into her future with clear eyes. So no, she would not be wrong to put up that camera. I think she would be wrong not to. The question of whether you are overreacting is only relevant when the signals you are reading are ambiguous. These signals are not ambiguous. They are specific, they are recurring, and they are getting more obvious with every passing week. She asked if she would be the bad guy for trying to find out the truth. She would not be. The only person in this story who might be the bad guy is the one tilting his phone away. My verdict is straightforward. She is not only justified in placing that camera, she owes it to herself to do it. Weeks of confusion and self-doubt and carrying this weight alone have already cost her enough. The alternative is continuing to live in limbo, continuing to doubt her own instincts, continuing to smile through a relationship that may already be over, and that is not a kindness to herself. That is a sacrifice of her own clarity in service of someone who is not being transparent with her. Place the camera. Find out the truth. And then, whatever that truth is, make your decisions from a place of information rather than fear. You cannot build a future on a foundation you are not allowed to examine. I walked out of his family's Christmas and now his mom is acting like nothing happened. She walked out of his family's Christmas dinner. Not stormed out in a dramatic scene. Just quietly, deliberately stood up, recognized that she had reached her absolute limit, and left. And the thing that makes this story so layered and so painful is that the person she loves most was not the one who drove her out of that room. It was the people he was supposed to be able to count on to be decent. For those coming in fresh, this is an update to a story that started about 2 months before this Christmas. The original post details what happened that set all of this in motion, and while we do not have every detail here, what we do know is that his mother and his sister did something, or a series of things, significant enough that she ultimately could not sit across the table from them through an entire holiday meal. and significant enough that when her fiancé tried to address it, his mother responded with complete denial. Let me walk you through what happened after she left, because the way his family responded to all of this tells you almost everything you need to know about them. Her fiancé went to his mother. Not once, but multiple times. He tried to have an honest conversation about what happened, about how it affected his partner, about why it mattered. Picture what that must have looked like. A man sitting across from his own mother, searching her face for any sign of recognition, any flicker of remorse, any small acknowledgement that something had gone wrong. And finding nothing. His mother, every single time, acted as though she had done absolutely nothing wrong. Not defensive exactly, not apologetic, just blank. Like the events in question had simply not occurred in any version of reality she was willing to acknowledge. And whenever he tried to bring up his fiancé specifically, his mother would just pivot. Change the subject. Talk about something else entirely. Ignore the name the moment it entered the conversation. That kind of selective hearing is not confusion. That is a choice. It is a deliberate strategy dressed up as passivity, and it is one of the most maddening things a person can do to someone who is genuinely trying to repair something. His sister was apparently even further gone than his mother, because he did not reduce contact with his sister. He went to zero. Complete and total removal of that relationship from his life. And that is not a decision people make lightly. You do not cut off a sibling over a minor misunderstanding or a single awkward moment. There is history there, shared childhood, years of familiarity and assumption that the relationship is unconditional. Choosing to walk away from all of that means the alternative became worse than the loss. That is a decision that comes from repeated behavior, from a pattern that finally crossed a line so clearly that there was no longer any rational argument for keeping the door open. Whatever she did, or kept doing, he had apparently reached a point where protecting himself and his partner outweighed every other consideration. That is not a small thing. His dad, interestingly, seems to be living in an entirely different version of this family story. He is described as completely oblivious, which is a complicated thing to sit with. On one hand, his obliviousness means he has no grudge, no position, no hostility toward either of them. He seems to have no issue with his son or with her. And in a situation where almost every other family member is either part of the problem or caught in the middle, a genuinely neutral party is actually something. On the other hand, you have to wonder how someone can be that disconnected from serious conflict happening within his own household. Whether that is a personality trait, a coping mechanism, a long-practiced habit of looking away when things get uncomfortable, or simply the comfort of not knowing, we cannot say for sure. But his neutrality, however it got there, is at least one less battle to fight. Oh, and then the extended family got involved. Because of course they did. Some of his extended family members reached out to him with the clear impression that he was the one in trouble. Not that something bad had happened. Not that a conflict had occurred. That he specifically was in trouble, which tells you immediately whose version of events had been circulating. His mother, or someone close to her, had been framing this whole situation in a way that positioned him as the problem. So he had to explain himself. To people who already had context they had received secondhand, from a source with an obvious agenda. He had to untangle someone else's narrative about his own life and try to replace it with the truth. Imagine sitting down to have that conversation with a cousin or an aunt, someone you care about, knowing they walked into it already carrying a version of events designed to make you look like the villain. Knowing you have to be calm and clear and credible while also managing your own hurt and exhaustion. And I want to be clear about how exhausting and humiliating that is, to have to go around correcting a story about yourself that someone else is telling, to people who matter to you, while you are already dealing with the emotional weight of what caused the story in the first place. She is still struggling with guilt. She wrote it clearly herself. She still has a hard time accepting that it was not her fault that her fiancé had to do this with his mother. She feels like she could have done more to prevent it. Maybe said something differently. Maybe stayed at the table longer. maybe handled some earlier moment in a way that would have changed the outcome. And I want to address that directly because I think it is incredibly important. The guilt she is carrying does not belong to her. When someone behaves badly toward you and your partner chooses to hold them accountable for it, that accountability is not your fault. You did not cause his mother to act the way she did. You did not cause his sister's behavior. You did not cause the denial or the subject changing or the extended family drama. All of that existed independently of anything you did or did not do. His family's behavior is the reason he had to make these choices. Not you. The fact that she is sitting here feeling responsible for the fracture in his family relationships actually speaks beautifully to the kind of person she is. A selfish, manipulative person does not lie awake wondering if they could have done more. A person who caused this intentionally does not feel guilty about it. The guilt she is carrying is the guilt of someone who genuinely loves her partner and genuinely wishes things had gone differently, even though she did nothing wrong. And that kind of guilt, while understandable, is a weight she needs to set down. Because here is the thing. He made these choices. Not under pressure from her. Not because she issued an ultimatum or forced his hand. He went to his mother multiple times, independently, and tried to resolve it. When it became clear that resolution was not something his mother was interested in, he made a decision about what level of contact was healthy and appropriate for his life going forward. That is called being an adult. That is called standing up for your partner and for yourself simultaneously. It is actually one of the healthiest things a person can do in a dysfunctional family dynamic, and she should feel supported by it, not guilty about it. There is something else worth naming clearly, which is that this story does not have a tidy ending, and she was honest enough to say so. She does not know how the extended family is reacting now that they have the truth. That uncertainty is real and it will probably sit there for a while. Healing from something like this is rarely linear. Some days the dust will seem to settle and other days a single text or a family event on the calendar will bring all of it rushing back. But here is what we do know. His mother had multiple chances to take accountability and chose not to. His sister's behavior was severe enough to warrant complete removal from his life. The people worth keeping are still there, including his father, and apparently some of his extended family who now know the actual story. The noise around the edges does not define what is at the center. My verdict here is clear and I feel strongly about it. She has nothing to apologize for and nothing to feel guilty about. Walking out of that Christmas dinner was not an act of weakness or drama. It was an act of self-respect. And her fiancé going low contact with his mother and zero contact with his sister is not a tragedy she caused. It is a consequence his family created entirely on their own through their behavior and then compounded through their refusal to acknowledge it. The people in this story who owe apologies are not the ones giving them. And the person who is sitting here questioning whether she did enough is the only one who clearly did nothing wrong. Stand your ground. Let the guilt go. You did not break this family. They broke themselves. Drop a comment telling me which story hit harder for you. I genuinely want to know. And if you made it this far, a like and a subscribe would mean everything.